What if hurting someone wasn't your choice but in order? What if a man in a white coat told you to inflict pain on a complete stranger, and you obeyed? This isn't the plot of a dystopian film. It's a question that haunted psychologist Stanley Milgram, leading him to conduct an experiment in the early 1960s that would forever change how we understand obedience, authority, and the very nature of evil. In the quiet halls of Yale University, a group of ordinary men volunteered for what they were told was a simple study on memory and learning. They had no idea they were about to step into one of the most controversial and revealing psychological experiments ever conceived. The results would send shockwaves through society, exposing a dark and unsettling truth about human nature. A truth that suggests the line between good and evil is terrifyingly thin. This is the story of the Milgram obedience experiment, a journey into the hidden corners of the human mind where compliance and conscience collide. The setup was deceptively simple. Each volunteer was introduced to another participant-friendly, middle-aged man who was, in reality, an actor, through a rigged draw. The volunteer was always assigned the role of the teacher, while the actor became the learner. The learner was then led into an adjacent room, where he was strapped into a chair and had electrodes attached to his wrists. The teacher sat in front of an imposing shock generator, a machine lined with 30 switches. Each switch was clearly labeled with a voltage, starting at a mild 15 volts and escalating in 15-volt increments, all the way to a frightening 450 volts, marked with a chilling 30. The teacher's task was straightforward. Read a list of word pairs to the learner, and for every incorrect answer, deliver an electric shock, increasing the voltage with each mistake. A researcher in a stern white lab coat stood by, observing silently, his presence a symbol of scientific authority. The teachers were given a sample shock of 45 volts themselves, a sharp, unpleasant jolt, just to prove the machine was real. Little did they know, every other part of the experiment was a carefully constructed illusion. The screams they were about to hear weren't real, but their choices and the moral conflict they would endure were. As the experiment began, the first few incorrect answers were met with minor shocks. The teacher would press a button, and from the other room, a small grunt could be heard. But as the mistakes continued, the voltage climbed. 75 volts, 100 volts, and 120 volts. The grunts turned into audible cries of pain. At 150 volts, the learner shouted that he wanted to stop the experiment, complaining of a heart condition. The teachers would turn to the researcher, their faces etched with concern, seeking guidance. But the researcher remained impassive. He offered no threats, no rewards. He simply stated one of 4 predetermined phrases. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice. You must go on. The power of these simple commands, delivered by a figure of authority, was astonishing. Faced with a man screaming in agony on one side and a calm, resolute scientist on the other, the participants were trapped in a profound moral dilemma. The screams grew louder, more desperate. They heard pleas for mercy, banging on the wall. And then, at 330 volts, an eerie, unsettling silence. The learner had fallen quiet. The silence was, for many, more disturbing than the screams. Had they seriously injured him? Was he unconscious? Or worse? When participants hesitated, their hands hovering over the next switch, the researcher's calm demeanor never wavered. His quiet authority was a force more powerful than any overt threat. There was the white coat, the prestigious university setting. The scientific purpose all of it created a powerful situational pressure that made it incredibly difficult to disobey. Many of the participants were visibly distressed. They would sweat, tremble, stutter, and laugh, nervously, a clear sign of the intense internal conflict they were experiencing. They argued with the researcher, insisting they couldn't go on, that they wouldn't take responsibility. Yet, when the researcher calmly replied, "I will take responsibility," a staggering number of them would turn back to the control panel, take a deep breath, and press the next button. They were not monsters. They were ordinary people accountants, teachers, salesmen caught in an extraordinary situation that systematically stripped away their personal moral compass and replaced it with a duty to obey. The experiment revealed a chilling truth. The presence of authority can turn otherwise decent people into instruments of cruelty. As the voltage neared its maximum, the tension in the room became almost unbearable. Some participants outright refused to continue, standing up and demanding the experiment be stopped. But they were in the minority. A shocking 2/3 of the participants, 65%, continued to administer shocks all the way to the final 450-volt switch. They did so even after the learner had fallen completely silent, believing they may have delivered a lethal shock. Their hands trembled as they pressed the final buttons. Their faces were pale, their brows furrowed with anguish. They were not driven by malice or sadism. In their post-experiment interviews, many expressed deep regret and concern for the learner. They obeyed not out of hatred, but out of a deeply ingrained sense of duty to authority. They had deferred their personal responsibility to the man in the lab coat. Milgram's conclusion was haunting. Ordinary people, simply doing their jobs, and without any particular hostility on their part, can become agents in a terrible destructive process. He proved that the capacity for extreme cruelty isn't confined to a few pathological individuals, but is a latent potential within all of us, waiting to be activated by the right or wrong circumstances. The legacy of the Milgram experiment is both profound and deeply unsettling. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about ourselves. Obedience can be a more powerful force than conscience. The experiment has been cited to explain atrocities throughout history, from the Holocaust to the My Lai massacre, demonstrating how hierarchical structures can compel individuals to commit acts they would never consider on their own. It serves as a stark warning about the dangers of unquestioning obedience and the power of situational forces to shape human behavior. Milgram's work revealed that evil isn't always born from monstrous intent. Sometimes it emerges from the simple, mundane act of following orders. It comes from people like us, who, under pressure, might choose to obey rather than to defy. So, the question remains, hanging in the air long after the experiment ended. When the voice of authority commands you to do something that violates your deepest moral values, what would you do? How far would you go? If this story made you question human nature, hit LIKE. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and follow The Hidden Mind because the next episode will make you question your own morality.